Welcome, everybody, to this special deep dive from Craft Beer and Brewing on terpenes, brewing with terpenes, and the like, brought to you by Abstrax. Our guests, brewers on this episode are actually, it's not an episode, is it? It's a deep dive. It's hard to break some of that kind of podcast paradigm in my language. You can laugh at me all you want, Ben, but you understand exactly what this is. Our guest brewers for this episode are Patrick Bork from Kiitos. Welcome to this deep dive, Patrick.
Thank you very much for having me.
This is in some ways kind of I getting CBC flashbacks as we sit here. Patrick and I had a great conversation at CBC. He brewed that incredible 100% Fonio beer that was just clear. Absolutely mind-blowing. We got a good conversation about process around that. We're gonna have to follow up in the future and have more conversations about that, Patrick. But I'm really interested in that, and I know everyone is, in getting your approach and thoughts and practice around brewing with terpenes. Ben Edmonds, also when we were at CBC, we were bouncing around. You grabbed me like, "Have you tried all of the Abstrax?" Because the Abstrax booth, Barbara, what was the name of it? It was a Skunkworks Lounge, right?
Correct, Skunkworks Lounge.
And you had a voting process out there for voting on the various beers. So Ben, of course, wanted to go vote for his beer in this lineup of something like that.
All self-interest. No, the education level is 0. It's just purely self-interest.
Sure.
Hi,
Anyway,
everybody. Nice to be here.
There's Ben Edmonds. I think we all know Ben Edmonds because Ben is a legend here in the brewing world and a Russell Share Award winner and all of that. And then Barbara Stone joining us. Barbara was the one who poured and shared those samples with us at the Skunkworks Lounge at CBC. Barbara, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. And Breakside had an amazing showing at the Skunkworks competition. So kudos to his team.
A lot of interesting beers, different strategies around approaches to using them. It was not everyone trying to do the same thing. It was this kind of breadth of, some were more dank, some were more fruit focused. I mean, there was just this kind of interesting breadth of flavor and lots of different ways that brewers are using it. Through the course of this deep dive, we want to kind of tease in some of those practices and processes that allow for different kinds of outcomes through the brewing process. We're going to talk about how to use these, what they are, right? Understanding what those terpenes are, what that process is that Abstrax uses in order to create these, whether they are thoughtful terpene extracts, whether they are reconstructing specific flavors in different kinds of ways, using these terpenes, what that process is, for producing that and how they kind of map out flavor. That's the most fascinating thing on the science side of this, is how the research that folks like Abstrax are doing into this have allowed us to understand flavor and the interactions of these varying flavor and aroma compounds in deeper and deeper ways. So we're going to get into some of that science, and then we're going to break out into some of the practice. For all of you guys that are watching, or all of you brewers out there who are following on all the platforms, this is feeding out to. Throw some comments in there in the chat box. I will be monitoring those. And so if you have questions for anyone here on the panel as we go through, by all means, just throw those up in the chat. We will try to keep an eye on that and get those questions in, and all of us can see that. And I will also try to remind people when those good questions come up. The whole point of this is that we can be interactive about it, and we can try to dig a little bit deeper, and we can all do that together. That is the benefit of this format. But why don't we start out, Barbara? Why don't you give us a little bit of background in this? Frame this for us from the Abstrax perspective. What are we talking about when we talk about terpenes here? What is their function, in beer aroma and flavor? And then, then we can kind of go from there and talk about, the Abstrax approach and how, Abstrax is creating products that, they either isolate or emulate in various kinds of ways.
Absolutely. So the terpene participation in the beer and the flavor world is all about flavor and aroma. We are not going for any of the acid isomerization. We're not going for the polyphenol mouthfeel. We are using the terpene oil compounds strictly to help impart flavor and aroma into your finished beverage. And that's it. and it's a maximum capacity type of flavor and aroma. So we're harnessing it, we're making it extremely useful in a water soluble product, and it's used in every beverage now. So the terpenes themselves are the technology building blocks for the future of what flavor is right now.
So then let's talk a little bit about what that process is that Abstrax uses, because there's a few different modes that you all use, whether that's, say, isolating terpenes out of hops, or even trying to map out and understand what these, varying, kind of, whether it's levels and the way that certain things that we perceive, flavors and aromas that we perceive, are actually created through these kinds of terpenes. Give us a little bit of background on how, in the science behind that.
Absolutely. And, we do have a really fascinating flavor technology video on our YouTube channel. So someone from my company, I'm sure, will post that in the comments for us. But that will go through some of our technology about how we flavor map a product and rebuild it using terpene isolates specifically from scratch. But how we come at it just from a macro level is we have some of the leading technology in the world in flavor mapping. So we can identify hundreds, if not thousands now, of compounds that contribute to the flavor and aroma of a product. If it's a cannabis variety that we want to mimic in flavor and aroma, or if it's a pineapple, or if it's a cherry. And we can take those flavors and we can break it down by so many different compounds and see the different levels, the altitudes of the different peaks where they hit on the GCxGC mapping. And we can use our flavor technology experts, not just on the data manipulation and reading portion, but also our flavor creators, to combine talents and skill sets to recreate in completeness what that flavor looks like, just using the terpene building blocks from different botanical sources. And it's created an opportunity to help find a solution in the flavor industry when we're seeing more widespread agricultural issues when it comes to crop moments, whether it's deep freezes in Mount Vesuvius with blood orange, or Argentinian raspberries having a hiatus for a year, or cherries here in Hood River, Oregon, that might have a lower yield due to different issues. So the terpene creation and the flavor mapping piece is our core technology. And with that said, we have another core technology that's really hit a sweet spot for brewers, and that is in the water-soluble hop oils. And we can have a very lot-specific hop oil pulled directly from their own hop that has been selected in Yakima or Oregon or Idaho. And we can make it to be a true to lot cold side soluble product that gives them a little bit more efficiencies, a little bit more cost support to market challenges with their rising cost of goods, and then also just that extra oomph of flavor and aroma that they need to help support their beers into the future.
So if I'm getting this right, you are producing basically some sort of generally true to type, terpene extract of that maps out to specific hop varieties. You make other kinds of botanical and fruit flavors that are created from these terpenes, and then you will also process individual brewers selected lots of hops, map those out using this GC process, and then give them a soluble, stable, dosable product that they can use that is built from or based upon their own selected lots, so that, as you say, if the next crop year doesn't exactly come back within the same spec that they want it to be in their hop selection, they could pull in some of your product that maps that same exact, the flavor peaks and valleys, aroma peaks and valleys.
Yeah, and even more specifically, the second technology is we'll just turn their hops into oil. So we can map it and we can flavor map it for future needs if they would like, or we can just take their hops and say, oh, this is what you want. And we can just turn it into the oil, and then they have that for their beer as a cold side solution that is TTB approved as just hops on their can.
Sure. So let's talk about the kind of the nature of this science. I am totally fascinated and have been following. It was years ago when New Belgium made the Hemperor beer. We went over and got into that because I'm here in Fort Collins. They're here. We went over to the lab, saw the GC. We looked at some of the because they were mapping out cannabis strains using their GC, then trying to think about what it was that created these. I remember thinking, when you look at this report of peaks and valleys that comes out of this GC, thinking this is the craziest science to try to unpack, understanding what the thresholds are for, because just because something pops up at a certain level in a GC doesn't mean that's the thing that people are perceiving the most. You now have this kind of multi-axis impact where small amounts of this one thing are either amplifying or buffering the kind of impact of this other thing, and so figuring out what does what and how the things impact each other has to be a pretty complex equation and algorithm for you all to work through.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, that is why we take some of the best research scientists in the world, and we hire them and we have them on staff. It's their job to help not just double down on our products that we're making for brewers, but double down on our flavor technology. And we have some of the leading researchers in the industry working for us. So first, I want to say shout out to Ross for the Hemperor. He is an innovative human through and through and a fantastic brewer. And he definitely opened the doors and paved the ways for the terpenes that we are bringing into the market right now. Also, I think the TTB caught a lot of flack for that beer. And so also made necessary having these flavors recreated from other botanical sources in the market as well. But what it is it's not just GC anymore. GC readouts and trying to create flavors to a GC technology can be very one-dimensional. And I think, when I judge beer competitions, one of my favorite judges to judge with is Tanya Cornett. And she does this beautiful display of sort of response when she tastes a beer, and she mentions she wants it to be a story, and there needs to be a beginning and a middle and an end finish, and that's how we want all of our flavors to be, not just the beer, but we want the flavors going into the beer the same way. And so if you are just relying on GC data, you're going to have the very one-dimensional peaks, and your flavor is not going to be super complex. But what we've done is we've gone a step further, and we have what we call a GC by GC. And that is going to be not just seeing the peaks, but it's almost like you have a drone, and you're seeing the peaks, but you're also seeing behind it and around it, and you're seeing the depths and what's hiding and just how much is hiding. And that's the technology that we have access, that we use, and that we've really perfected to make our flavors not that one-dimensional piece anymore, but now it really is a true profile of what it's supposed to taste like and smell like.
Super cool. Super cool. Let's start talking about practical application then, where the science starts meeting brewing. And maybe we'll start with you, Ben. You've watched, terpenes kind of develop over the last 10, 15 years. You've watched, and the entire kind of advanced hop products side of that hop industry. Well, we just had a question. What is GC? That's a gas chromatograph. Just so that we're clear about that. And I'll also say that when Barbara mentioned Ross, you mean Ross Koenigs, right? Who is then the innovation brewer at New Belgium and is now launched Second Dawn Brewing out in Aurora, Colorado. So just so that everybody knows who we're talking about there. In fact, we've got a class on brewing with cannabis on craft beer and brewing that is hosted by Ross. And so, a subject that is near and dear to everyone's heart here. Ben, but let's talk about that. You've watched this evolution of these tools in your brewing toolbox. Let's talk about this kind of recent, the Abstrax development, the opportunity that you saw in it, and how it started sparking some of your brewer creativity.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that as with a lot of the advanced products that we see that are hop derived or hop adjacent, there's been a tremendous improvement in quality in what's available to brewers in the marketplace. And also to something that kind of Barbara mentioned, finding these from hop derived sources and hop derived material as opposed to kind of synthesized from artificial flavors or natural flavors, I think probably gives a permission structure to a lot of people who had hangups around using kind of flavorings, top notes in their beers in a way that previously just was not available. And it's really been a major breakthrough, both from Abstrax and some of the other suppliers on these terpene products. So I guess there's kind of two lanes for me that I began approaching these in as these kind of, let's say these kind of products that I felt better about using and more bought into, both from a quality and provenance point of view, came to market. The first was kind of as a substitute. And, we were, frankly, we started kind of ramping up our use of the Quantum product from Abstrax in particular when we had run out of our selected cryo lots on a couple of varietals in late 2024, that would have been. And that was kind of when we really started first testing that terpene product. And the impact was really evident to us really quickly, both in terms of yield, in terms of shelf stability, lots of positives we can get into there. So that was kind of more the taking something that we were already doing and plugging it in as a substitution because of necessity. The other was more a response, and I think this kind of speaks more to the, let's say, the non-quantum type products, or the some of the stuff that's more kind of fruit or cannabis oriented. One of the big problems we have, I think, as brewers still is that when we talk about the fruitiness of hops, most people who are not brewers or not major beer nerds don't perceive hops as fruity. They perceive them as hoppy. My husband often smells a beer. He's like, that doesn't smell like mango or passion fruit. That smells like hops. And I think that there are these now hop-derived terpenes that actually smell like fruit that map, to Barbara's point, to be more like passion fruit or rhubarb or peach or mango in ways that is a lot more accessible to average consumers. And I think that is a lever that brewers should be willing to pull in order to make our beers more appealing to a mass audience.
Sure. So if I'm catching it right, you have both the creative side, but also the functional side. Obviously, your production brewery, yield matters also. Controlling green matter in, especially at today's hopping rates, becomes a real question there. The more those hops, when you put T90 pellets in a beer, it's going to absorb, those pellets are going to absorb that liquid and you're going to get less out of it. And so you have to be thinking at that kind of scale. Patrick, for you guys, production, like large scale production, isn't necessarily the focus. Efficiency, though, for a smaller brewery is still important. You go to the trouble of brewing a beer. How did you approach this? Were you looking at it from that creative side or the production kind of efficiency side, or both?
I think for us, it was kind of easy to start off on the experimental side of things. The kits come with the vials that are almost perfectly made for sixtels. So they're really, really easy for brewers to start experimenting with right off the bat. Just kind of dose the sixtel, see how the customer reacts, and go from there. So we started purely for fun and experimentation, but right off the bat realized how this isn't just kind of like these new products are a little more, true to type in a lot of ways. So for us, it was like, let's just start replacing hops. In a small, start off with 5% and work up from there and see if there's anything to this. So it kind of turned into both for us, and we're still playing in both realms where we're experimenting a lot with some of the products that we haven't used and using those kind of on the small scale 5-gallon or sixtels. And the big stuff is starting to actually replace hops and fermenters. And for us, that's yield. It's almost like we're kind of mini production. We're not super small, but for us, we still need to kind of watch our numbers. So to just be able to replace some hops and get better yields was huge. I think one of the more unexpected results of all these experiments is that we found a lot of increased shelf stability. So it was almost something to lean into more, make IPAs kind of pop a little bit on the shelf after 2 months. Some of our beers don't hit a grocery store shelf for a month. So the customer, the freshest they might taste it is a month out. So these products are kind of fun to play in those regards because they kind of keep a little bit of that top note popping, if you will.
Barbara, do you guys have some science behind that? I mean, I have heard also independently of this conversation, that stability piece entering into it. Is that kind of hop degradation in package over time obviously oxygen's a function, but that's going to be controlled. This is the same thing whether you're using Abstrax or whether you're using T90s in a beer. From your perspective, do you have some idea of what is allowing the kind of hop flavor and aroma in abstract product, beer made with those products to hold on longer in packaged beer?
Yeah, we're actively trying to not make this an anecdotal conversation. We are working on the research and the data behind it to help communicate the value add for you from a shelf life perspective. Anecdotally, what I can offer right now without having that research to present is that, one, you're removing oxidative material when you're pulling out T90s, right? So there's less in there to be oxidating. Secondly, though, there is absolutely a technology that we're putting in the beer that is holding on, that is staying in suspension, and not just not oxidizing, because we don't have the oxidative characteristics in our product going into your beer, but masking what could still be happening in the beer underneath it. So I guess hold music for when that research is finished, and you can choose the song in your head for that hold music and let it stick there for a few months. But it is in the works, and we're hoping to be able to put some data points to that to share with the industry.
Ben, let's get back to that question of kind of creative process. As you started experimenting with Abstrax and then have kind of followed through over the last couple of years, how does your process generally work about finding avenues for using these within specific beers? Talk about your testing process. Are you doing A/B batches and testing? Are you doing slow adds? Are you does benchtop testing figure into this process for you? Talk about some of the ways that you have evaluated, because you're a risk taker, but you're also only going to take smart risks as you do this. And so you want to make sure you have a good idea about what the outcomes are going to be by the time it goes prime. Talk about your creative process around this.
Well, we don't really do a ton of table topping. I guess we do some bench topping here for sure at Breakside. And typically with some of the other terpene products that are in the marketplace that are a little bit more concentrated, that is something where we have done it. In the case of Quantum specifically, given kind of our relationship with Barbara, having spoken with the folks at Abstrax, we felt pretty confident that we could go into a 10-barrel batch using it as a sub for half a fluid ounce per pound of hops as a rough starting point, without having to run a ton of tabletop pipetting and whatnot. So I do recommend that a lot when we're suddenly talking about milliliters and grams as opposed to fluid ounces here. But for the most part, I think we're adding 3, 4, 8, 32 ounces of Quantum to batches of beer for us. We also have the ability to do it at a 3 or 10 barrels kind of size as a starting point for us, which at our brewery size is that's a risk that I'm willing to take usually. That all said, in terms of the creative process and where we're using this, we do really view the Quantum product as a substitute for other concentrated pellets. And that's where we found the most success with it, because you're not trying to replace the kind of polyphenol contributions of T90 pellets, the vegetative matter that, may be beneficial if you, suddenly remove it. We're really looking at a removal of already concentrated aspects of the beer with a different product that we may feel maybe more shelf stable, or simply offers us a different punch than a selected lot or a spot lot of that hop might be. And so I think when we're one way that I think about Quantum in particular is that if it's a beer where we're really trying to kind of turn the knob up on one particular hop or one particular aspect of the beer, it's a really great way to do that at the kind of last touch. We think about anecdotally, I think that the later you can add the hop to the beer, the more likely you are to taste that beer. There may be some survivables advocates out there who disagree with me on that, but I think that we see a lot of punch and power from our later dry hops, from those later editions of Quantum. We're doing fresh hop beers from cold side fresh hop editions. And, I think that in this case, if we want that beer to punch up on Mosaic, because that really is the note that we want to lead with, we will turn toward Quantum. If it's the same thing, if it's a Rawaka beer, a Nelson beer, whatever else. So it really depends for us a lot on the hop profile that we're imagining.
Patrick, let's talk about your creative process and that. Are you, do you use it in that similar way to kind of amplify specific hop characters, or the, varietal specific kind of hop identity and boost that in that later process? Are you using it, and then, how do you then blend that? Are you blending it, or are you even blending it with other hop formats, whether that's T90 or concentrated pellets or anything else, in order to build an overall hop character? Or are you not doing that and going full on in and finding some other avenue of intensity or subtlety with them?
Yeah, when we started using these things, it was mostly kind of very cold side on the way to the bright cake. And what we've started to do is play around with them during ferments, and we've kind of found a difference in flavor. I'm not sure if I prefer one or the other quite yet, but we're starting to play around with where to put them, whether you're putting them in with the hops or even prior to the first dry hop during fermentation. I'll probably know a lot more about that in about 2 months. But yeah, as far as creative direction goes, we're usually trying to top up the same notes that our hops have. So if our hops are presenting kind of the mango-y, passion fruity thing, maybe we'll pick hops that are similar for that application. We've even played around a little bit with the Abstrax Sky Farm series, and kind of to Ben's note, where Ben was talking about consumers don't always see flavors, hop flavors as fruity. We've actually started to add those notes in very small amounts to see if we can boost those little bits, and we've had super positive reaction from consumers so far.
Barbara, explain Sky Farm and what that is, and so that people have some context for understanding how that in particular might reinforce some of the fruit flavor notes that a brewer might write in based on the kind of hop compounds.
Yeah, so Sky Farm is our brand suite devoted to fruit flavors. And in particular, we are going for true to fruit flavor and not confectionery and not overripe, not green, but true to fruit characterizations. So anything from pineapple to citrus flavors like blood orange or clementine to stone fruit, passion fruit's one of my favorites. Our goal is to have a addition to your beverage that you either want to be the top note, something that just amplifies what you have there, or make it so you don't have to add the extra 500 pounds of puree just to get the aroma buildup, because that is also very, very expensive. We find a lot of brewers struggle with pectin considerations with fruit adds, differences in crop years to color and or flavor or acidity of a different fruit. So the Sky Farm is the consistent play for a true to fruit terpene based flavor outcome that can be dosed on the cold side. There are no fermentables in it. So it's safe to use on the cold side and just in the right amount that you need to get the flavor outcome that you want.
Ben, how do you use those just like in smaller amounts? Obviously, not as a one-to-one replacement for other kinds of dry hops, but just to kind of reinforce a specific fruit flavor when you know that your husband may not get that out of the beer when he samples the beer that you made.
Yeah, we are definitely using that as a flavor hook in certain beers. Nothing major that's not gone to any like major production beers, but we have used kind of fruit terpenes that are not ostensibly hop replacements to push up the perception of those particular fruits. And I think there's the angle there in my mind is that you're still trying to like just kind of deliver the impact that you want. Is kind of to boost the hops. And so for me, if the first thing I smell when I smell that beer has suddenly gone toward the fruit terpene, I know that we've gone too far, right? That's like it's kind of got a artificial quality to it where suddenly it's not, my spidey sense goes off. I'm like, that's not really hops I'm smelling anymore. But if you can get something that is like a guava or a passion fruit or a pineapple, and oftentimes we chase some of those we're like chasing those threads in hops, and they don't deliver in the most clarion ways. Where a hop that might have that 1 year, suddenly, to Barbara's point, the crop isn't the same, and that pineapple note that you found in this particular lot of El Dorado that you really liked back in 2017 is something that you're constantly chasing. This is a really simple way to try and just pop that accent and leave it there. So I do think there's a lot of potential in that area.
And kind of low threshold dosing in that.
Yeah, much lower than we would be doing if, say, if we were advertising it as a like, a pineapple wheat beer or something like that. We have gone that route too. Like we just recently did. Barbara, are we not mentioning your competitors' names at this point?
No. Nice try, Ben. It's all love. It's all love.
We used someone who is not Abstrax's product in a beer recently to replace some lime. And, in that case, we're using a more like kind of top note type level where it really is replacing the fruit. But in conjunction with hops, it's at a much, much lower threshold. Ben,
you're welcome to drop the name. I was kidding. I actually have a dear love for this lime flavor out there. I think it's incredible.
If anyone really wants to know, they can text me or email me. We'll keep it clean. Clean and sponsored.
Let's talk about how you work in these terpenes into a broader hopping kind of program. Obviously, Ben, as you mentioned it, you are thinking about all of those hop flavors. The green matter and polyphenol impact of hops is still something people expect out of beers, and that is not what Abstrax is trying to replace. And so generally speaking, you are using Abstrax in concert with hops and other kinds of formats. Let's talk for the two of you about how you think about how it fits into an overall hopping program in terms of first hop side, what you then choose on hot side, knowing that this is going to be a downstream addition later in the process, and then how it works in. I know Patrick mentioned you work it in. You're now playing around with some of that active fermentation addition of this, another interesting kind of element that we can unpack. But as you think about a general like kind of hop addition strategy for one of your IPAs, how do you then think about how they fit into an overall program? Maybe you start, Ben.
Yeah, we've done a lot of trials where we kind of swung pretty high up initially and kind of back down from that in terms of like, percent of total hop load or just kind of like equivalency per barrel. So, for us, if we're brewing West Coast IPA, at the production level, that might mean that a total dry hop load is going to be kind of in the, if it's a core brand, it's going to be in the kind of like 3.5 pound per barrel finished beer range. If we're doing some of the pubs, that might be in the 5 to 6 pound per barrel range, just to kind of give our two poles of our baselines. And if we're going to be using quantum as a portion of that, the highest that we would really go is like 1.5 pound per barrel equivalent. So, in a 60 barrel batch, that might be 48 ounces would be the most that we would use. We found that once you get beyond that, it's either one of two things is happening. Either you're using so much of it that it's replacing more of that kind of vegetative matter that's kind of then leading you to have some gaps in texture that we find desirable, or there are just like some threshold that we've flagged internally where those aromatics get high enough, they do get a little bit chemically or synthetic. I think there is something that kind of like, there's an upper end before you start to say like that's an identifiable terpene character as opposed to a plausible hop character, right? So for us, that's kind of, given that is our program and that's our upper end for it, the question is, I'm going to go back to that thing that I said before, how much of that knob are we trying to turn on this beer on a particular varietal or one or two varietals? One thing that hasn't come up, I don't think that I haven't talked about, at least in kind of some of these presentations around quantum and talking to Barbara about Abstrax, is that one thing about the Abstrax product in particular about quantum is that I don't personally get a ton of the sulfur character of hops out of them. I think you tend to get a lot more on the kind of fruit, citrus, like that, those sides. So you have to kind of think about like what level of like, and sulfur is such an essential part of West Coast IPA these days and American IPA these days. I think that like trying to make sure that you integrate that into your beer separately from whatever you're doing on the Abstrax or the terpene side. And I think that enables us to, kind of drive a lot of that's just how we start to think about it. It's like, which product are we using? Would that be a concentrated pellet, a T90 pellet, or a terpene product in order to affect both the kind of fruit profile we want, the resin profile we want, and the sulfur profile we want out of a particular hop?
Just crank up that sulfur production from your lager yeast that you're making those IPAs with, right?
So that is one way to pull that lever. Yeah.
Patrick, how do you all integrate these into your overall hopping program? I like that, Ben. What, maybe 25% of an overall hop load is in a general sense on the high end, kind of going into these, just so I can keep track of this mentally.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's kind of been around the same level. I find that once we start going over that 20-25% mark, you can almost begin to taste the terpenes a little bit. Kind of a synthetic flavor comes off. So I think it's important to kind of back that down. And maybe if you're using higher dry hop loads, you wouldn't have to worry about that as much. For us, it's kind of interesting. Ben's talking about kind of trying to keep a lot of the polyphenol like texture from the T90s and stuff in their beer, but some of our IPAs we have to make at 5%, being here in Utah. So a lot of the times I'm actually trying to back that down, and this is becoming a tool that I'm starting to incorporate into some of our smaller IPAs to get more aroma and flavor without getting too much of a hop scratchiness on the tongue. And yeah, as I start to use it in replacement for those, the more I'm going to lean into it, I think. Yeah.
That's a really good point. As we think about, say, West Coast Pilsner with a strong hop character, but also, that need to be light and not, overbearing. And you want the intensity, but you also don't want, as you say, that scratchiness or some of that kind of, some of the other negative impacts of adding that many hops in that small beer. And then down even into the kind of hop water space and very, very or no alcohol kind of space with NA beer. These have some other applications there. Ben, have you played around in any of those spaces and found some avenues that some of these terpenes work really well in?
We don't do hop water ourselves or NA beer. We're kind of old school brewery, just making beer. So I can't really speak to that, but yeah, I mean, I do agree that in like lower ABV applications, kind of reduction of polyphenol matter is a huge advantage. And looking back to that question around using additional terpenes like Sky Farm to augment the fruit character of a, say, lower ABV beer. Our session IPA, we do use a little bit of a guava terpene in that as well, in order to kind of pop the perception of fruit, in addition to a bunch of thiol-bearing hops. So I think that there is something there. It's interesting to think about too, like, with the emergence of products like this, like it's kind of like a chicken and egg question, which is driving which? Is it like, I think that one of the reasons that West Coast IPA continues to advance so much toward intensity is because we have these products available to us, right? And brewers want to keep getting things out of the way that interfere with the ability to make these hops and these hops products smell so or translate so intensely and so kind of in such a clarion way to customers. And I think, it's like, which one happened first? And, maybe we need to have scratchier or heavier hop loads, heavier T90 loads when the beers were maltier, when they were, but also maybe the hops weren't as clarion. Maybe the products weren't quite as pristine and good. So it's interesting, just kind of, navel gazing on that front. But I do think the two drive each other.
Let's drill down into exact process about addition here, because there's a couple questions from Thomas and Phil out there in the comments. Talk about when you are adding. We talked about, Patrick, potentially adding some during active fermentation, and I've talked to other brewers that have mentioned they're playing around with some of the same. For you, are you then adding these with dry hops after fermentation, after you've dropped yeast? Are you adding these after you've dropped those last dry hops, the very last moment? Are they, talk about exactly how you go through this process of addition, and then what you may do to kind of homogenize and, make sure, because obviously these are soluble products, but they need to be worked through in an entire tank there. Talk to some about that technical process. Patrick, man, why don't you take this one first?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, for us, it's mostly post dry hop. So yeast is out, everything's kind of out of the beer at that point. We're moving it to the bright tank, and we're doing it in line, and that's worked really well for us. It's only recently that we began to experiment. I have not done at the beginning of fermentation. I think I'd like to try that next, but I don't think that'll be much different from kind of mid to late fermentation. I have not thrown it in with the hops, but I bet my cellar team would like if we took that route.
Ben, how about you? What's the technical process?
With Abstrax specifically, we've been adding that at transfer, either post centrifuge or in the case of our pub beers, just in transfer to the bright tank. We find that we're getting sufficient mixing there. We haven't really noticed any stratification. It does seem like, across an entire load, we're not really doing any additional agitation to try and solutionize or solubilize the quantum, and that's another huge advantage, because I think some of the kind of predecessor products in this space really struggled to stay in suspension, and that's not been the case, at least anecdotally, from what we can measure and see with quantum and with some of the other products out there. That said, there are a couple of other terpene products that I find have a more kind of raw green aromatic to them that are hop derived that can be really pleasant, and we tend to add those ones earlier. So we have done some knockout additions of terpenes. We have done some dry hop additions of terpenes, again, on ones where we think that maybe a little bit of kind of, time spent in contact with yeast might transform those biochemically in some way to make them a little bit more pleasant. But again, going back to the question around the kind of pristineness of the expression on the quantum, is that, there's not a lot that we want to biotransform there. We're trying to get that to translate pretty as directly as possible. And so that's that kind of naturalism, that purity that we're pursuing there. And then the bright tank edition really seems to do that well for us. I'm not opposed, I'd also love to see someone's use of it elsewhere in the process and would love to try it. But for us, at least for now, that's kind of where we've limited ourselves to.
Barbara, there's a question in the comments about dosing rates for Quantum and Sky Farm in hop water. Do you have any starting points for those?
Yeah, I would just caution everybody, and also Patrick is a pretty good expert at hop water. I had his last week in Salt Lake. It's spectacular. But I would caution everybody to make sure you have your mineral and acid levels up in your water, or it doesn't matter how many ounces of terpenes or flavors you add, it will not stay in suspension and it will fall out. So I would first and foremost say, half an ounce per barrel to an ounce per barrel seems to be sufficient, depending on if you want more fruit, less fruit, more hop, less hop. But that seems to be a pretty significant guiding light across the products when you start with a hop water. But you gotta do the trials with the mineral additions and the acid additions, or there won't be anything in there to hold the flavor there.
Patrick, what's your secret to hop water?
Yeah, so we've been experimenting a lot with hop water, and I think what we've kind of landed on as really successful for us is we've started dosing in a little Sky Farms on top of the hop water. So we're kind of picking a hop, and then we change it up every time. We don't have a set hop water brand yet. We've kind of been playing around with different fruit additions. But our rates right now are about, we're using 4 ounce of hop terpenes per 6 barrels. And then we'll top that up with about 80 milliliters of Sky Farms to kind of give it just a little bit of a fruit note. And we have, in competitions, we've had judges say it's perhaps a little too fruity and not hoppy enough, but kind of following our customers' palates as a guideline, this has really worked for us. I could barely keep this stuff on tap. The brewers really love it too. The whole staff has seen just drinking it all day long. So we've been playing around with that, and then we've also been playing around with some of the brew gas stuff, making kind of weed water, if you will, which is selling just as good, or at least going off tap just as fast.
Let's talk a little bit about individual hop varieties. This is after some previous conversations that I've had. I've gotten into more conversations with brewers, and one eye-opening one was talking about how these terpenes express differently based on the hop variety itself and some of the characteristics of that hop variety. Are there some that that either of you have discovered maybe amplify more than others, some where the effect of this is more clear and more impactful, or some where you find that they don't express as well? I'm curious about that. And when I say this, the conversations are 90% successful, and maybe one hop out of that didn't work as well as some of the others. Kind of interesting though that there is some variance there. I'm curious about, or are there beer styles where you find that West Coast IPA and this kind of pungency lends itself better than, say, in other kinds of beer formats? Let's talk about some of this kind of variety piece, and also understanding that there's a difference between any of your selected lots that might be quantum brightized versus versus some of the kind of broad variety specific versions that Abstrax also sells.
We've been saying that the verb we're going to use is to abstract.
To abstract
yeah,
it.
we're going to
Okay.
be abstracting. We're abstracting this lot or this poundage. I'd say for us, if I pulled the list up, we've probably run through most of our key varietals in a quantum form at some point. Citra, Simcoe, Mosaic for sure, Rawaka, Nelson, Nectaron, Strata, Chinook. And I think that it kind of maps pretty closely to our favored children already. No one gets too much of a boost by being in quantum form. I think for me, there are some maybe a couple situations, and I think this is true of concentrated pellets as well, where certain varietals that might carry some baggage around woodiness and some of the kind of where the polyfunctional or the functional polyphenols and some of the T90 formats of those hops create undesirable kind of woodiness or tactile aspects of the beer that maybe in a more advanced form you can drop them. And so if you look at our hop fridge, you'll notice a couple of varietals like Talus or 1019, where we have moved toward more cryo positions on those or concentrated pellet positions on those, crush as well. And so I can see like that being a thing. We've actually got a upcoming trial, or at least someone's pushing hard for an upcoming trial internally to use Centennial this way, specifically for that kind of question around stability versus staling and fruit expression versus woodiness. But to go to the basic question of, do some varietals suddenly outperform their T90 selves? So far, I would say it maps about the same.
Patrick, do you have any experience on that?
No, not as much as Ben. Most of the varieties that we use are kind of the fruit-forward varieties, and we definitely notice them. I haven't really gotten into using some of the more traditional, C hops. It'd be interesting to start playing around in that realm.
Ben, Phil has a question here. Since you're centrifuging your production beers, is there any difference, in when you use these Abstrax products between, say, a pub batch where it's been fined versus this centrifuge, kind of process with dosing inline after that?
Yeah, I saw that pop up in the comments, and maybe Phil, if you want to chime in here, are you talking about clarity or aromatics or both when wondering about interactions with finings? One thing that I have mentioned to Barbara a couple times over the last year is that I do think there is this kind of like blossoming period that has to take place. And I guess I would say because more of our experience is probably at the pub level that I tend to notice it more in our pub batches, but I'm not sure that to answer Phil's question, has much to do with finings versus centrifugation. But I do think, and this would be interesting, Barbara, when you guys get to that kind of stability question, is to try and include something about the way in which these may or may not take some time to fully express aromatically in a beer. And maybe there are certain cellar processes, fining versus centrifugation, the way in which people are carbonating, et cetera, that might be promoting more longevity or a quicker ripening.
That's fair. I appreciate that. I think that blossoming is a beautiful word. We refer to it sometimes as residency time in the beer itself. So the specific gravity of Abstrax is very similar to water. So when you pour it, it looks like a milky liquid that's just like a water or milk per se. And what we're finding is that these oils are, they're encapsulated. We emulsify our products. We don't use ethanol and we don't use PG as a carrier. So we emulsify them to make them water soluble and they go in. But that means our oil molecules are encapsulated. They're tightly encapsulated because we have an amazing emulsification technology as well that we want to be stable for people. We are confident that there is a residency time required for those encapsulated oils to fully integrate. Although they dissipate right away and they integrate into the liquid, we think that there's time that is happening, that it just needs contact time before those emulsified molecules really do just fully integrate completely into the total flavor of the beer. Some people, Patrick swears by 3 to 5 days. Ben swears by 3 weeks. I think it's all about trial. Again, it comes back to the conversation, to be honest with you, about benchtop versus production trials and what is the most important to get a real dialed in review of what this product will do. And, I'm borderline on the camp of benchtop is not always an accurate trial for a lot of these advanced products. You really have to take the leap of faith and throw it into a production mode, either small pilot production mode or small enough and a larger scale that you can blend it away if you don't like it. But it's the only way to really gauge what the outcome is going to be, is to just kind of like throw it in and see how it works with the residency time. One of the real beneficial things about it is it's flexible. So dosing at the time of dry hopping and not adding an additional step into your process seems to work for a lot of our partners.
I'll echo Barbara's kind of claim here, statement about kind of making that leap, taking that leap of faith a little bit, and because I was sort of poo-pooing benchtop trials earlier a little bit, and in this, and one reason for that is actually kind of material to this, which is when we were doing our Skunk Works competition beer. The first one, there were several rounds of this. We made a beer called Dime Bag, which was meant to kind of be a sledgehammer of a weed profile. And we did the first one. We thought it was just way too over the top. And then we did the second round. Actually, was not that beer. It was I think it was just a quantumized version of a different beer. And then we did Dime Bag again. We're like, okay, well, we're going to really ratchet it back this time. Went and tabletopped again to see what we thought. And we thought we had this beautiful thing. And again, we sent it in. And I mean, Jamie, you can touch that beer was like way too over the top still. So I think sometimes you're like kind of sitting there with a benchtop. It's a different environment. It's not exactly like you're being led to believe that you're going to underdose something, or you have to go heavy on something to get it to express. And then you go to the beer and all of a sudden it's just way more than what you expected. And we've also worked with other people's terpene products that do just the opposite, where you think you're going to get an awesome impact based on what you've tabletopped, and sometimes then you taste the beer and it's underwhelming.
Yeah, we've actually had the same experience where we've almost started dialing back our benchtop trials by about 25%. We found that if we just scaled up the benchtop directly, it would be too powerful.
We have a comment from Colt from Pax Verum in the comments about how he is splitting up his brewed gas addition and fermenting part of it, and then later adding the other 3/4. Have you all split your terpene additions across different timings? We've so far been talking about it as a single addition, given at one point, but obviously you can. There's potential at various points along the process to play with this. Have you all done any experimentation on either of those things?
I have not, but I would like to.
Yeah, sort of like what I said before was that we may be actually using 2 different terpene products in a beer. In the case of maybe one is being added earlier to kind of work through that green character and maximize the impact of that, or maybe actually retain some of that character, and then we're adding quantum at transfer. We have done double doses, like where it was stage doses into our bright tanks of Quantum, but that was more reactionary to how the beer was tasting and where we felt like it was and what we needed to get out of it, as opposed to a kind of master plan and strategy.
Sure, Barbara, as you work with a variety of brewer customers, across the spectrum who are using these Abstrax products. Are there some other insights that you have seen, and even whether it's anecdotally or that brewers have reported back to you, interesting use cases or ways that they have found to achieve interesting success with Abstrax terpenes, in some of their beers?
Absolutely. Vinny at Russian River insists on some of these Southern Hemisphere varieties going in at knockout, cold pool, and do knockout allow it to go through bio. We do get some fantastic interaction with our geraniol into citronol, and all those really amazing compounds that you get when it goes through bio. So we have a lot of brewers that swear by that. We also have done some trials. Our friend Jason at Von Ebert took his Mosaic through dosing trials. He put it in at knockout, then trialed it at fermentation, crash, cold side, and Mosaic for him did the same thing that he would have expected a pellet to do. The earlier it was dosed, the more tropical of an outcome it gave the beer. And then the cold side was more blueberry. So we definitely see the flexibility there, but it's going to behave, as Ben mentioned, very similar to what you would expect a T90 pellet or a concentrated pellet to have done, minus the polyphenol.
Interesting. I have had a conversation with Vinny about his Quantum Bright experience, and sent some texts around that. And I think we'll do a future episode of the Craft Brewing podcast and dive into some of those intricacies. No plans yet, but some pretty interesting things there, and using in different ways, and definitely some preferences around different hop varieties. Ben, as you think about how this program is going to evolve in the future, are there any avenues that you're not currently using it in that that have been sparked with some creativity by these products? Are there some things you are now excited to try that you might not have been able to try with some of the existing hop products as they were, or are there some other avenues that that you are curious about pursuing in this space?
100%. Starting on the business side of things, I mean, I just think that this enables us as a production brewery of our size to kind of make what I'll call like maximalist IPA in a way that's still kind of fiscally responsible. We can improve yield by subbing out, again, not T90, but maybe it is some writing new recipes that are less dependent on T90, subbing out some concentrated pellets for terpenes that will give us, again, from our perception, a little bit more shelf stability as well as just better yield. So there is kind of this ability to turn the knob. It's the best of both worlds. You're turning the knob on impact while also pulling that lever to improve yield and lower cost of goods per unit. So good stuff
in a real sense. How does that impact? Are you shaving off 5% or 10% cost? How does your yield improve when you use these?
Yeah, so like if we're taking, say, a 1.5-pound barrel equivalent, let's say going back to that number that I threw out earlier, about like say 32 to 48 ounces of Quantum, which would be the equivalent of like 66 to 99 pounds of T90 pellets. If we're making that sub in a beer that's got a 5.5 pound per barrel dry hop, or something we're doing as a one-off out of the production brewery, we're going from yielding, say, on a 60 barrel batch, we're going from like maybe 50, 51 barrels of finished beer to 56, 57, 58. I mean, it's really an impressive thing. There's some other factors in there too, about maybe the way the recipe is constructed, centrifugation, things like that. But I mean, we're looking at 6-7% improvement potentially. So that's not nothing. That's that's free beer in a lot of ways. And even it does this a lot of the same thing that concentrated pellets do. That's all, but just even on steroids in a certain way from that perspective. As far as kind of other creative avenues for the application of these that aren't necessarily kind of business oriented and business driven. I mean, almost all of our new recipe West Coast IPAs that come through production, all these collaborations we've done in the last handful of months, the ones we did with Beechwood and then with Radiant and now Everywhere, most recently, have all had some quantum contribution to them because we feel like those beers in the marketplace last longer, punch higher. So I think it's becoming not necessarily a crutch, but it's just this opportunity to incorporate a level of intensity in market IPAs that we didn't before. Outside of that space, I mean, yeah, we're talking about the kind of judicious use of things like brew gas, Sky Farm, other terpenes at low levels into beers that suddenly take your IPA and make them a lot less, that make them more accessible to more people who want that kind of fruit punch, not fruit punch, but punch, of fruit character. And then, we've used it also in some other styles as well. We've used it in black IPA. We've used it in in a Belgian beer too, where I think actually you can get some really cool interactions between POF positive yeast. So there's a lot of, kind of application in traditional styles. We haven't done it in an ESB yet, nor in a, American stout or anything like that. But maybe, we'll see what happens next. So, those are where our mind goes on it. But yeah, I think there's a lot of potential.
Patrick, for you, dual mode, right? Boosting intensity in these maximalist beers, also increasing efficiency. What was your primary focus there? And then are there some creative avenues that these are opening up that you are excited to continue exploring?
Yeah, I mean, these obviously, if you're using a liquid instead of like a T90, you're going to get some better yields. Where I'm starting to play around with is I want to actually start replacing puree in beers and see if I can get away with using a little less puree. That stuff's very expensive, and a lot of it just seems to come right out the bottom. So we've began trialing that. I think the hardest thing that we're finding is we have to find a color match, right? The fruit adds so much color that the terpenes don't. So whether that's blending in a little bit of a darker style fruit that kind of brings the same like color profile, but not too much of the other flavor, we've still got some stuff to learn there. Yeah, and as far as like kind of like new realms to take this, I've become really curious about some of the brew gas series and what those could bring to an actual beer in terms of like very minimal amounts that people wouldn't call it out as a marijuana-like product, but maybe they're just getting some little top note that they can't describe that's kind of giving this flavor and aroma that's similar and very strong to hops. And that's kind of what I've started experimenting with and been really excited about.
Ben, you all have a sensory program, and you've got smart people there that are checking these things as you go through a process, and you've got yourself in this process too. As you go through and and evaluate, say, working in these products into core brands where consumers have expectations about it, where you have standards for what these beers are. How have you then? How has that sensory reaction been to the some of the small changes as you then move, and I'm assuming that you have been moving some of those products with this and doing it slowly, smallly, checking against the kind of standards that you have for those things. Talk a little bit about that process of small movements, check, sensory test. And, there's obviously is it true to brand, but then there's also the kind of hedonic, do I like it even more? And is this even more of what this beer should be? How do you all then evaluate in that kind of area?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that, right? Because it's a hard question. I think it was, I can't really, if it was Charlie Danforth or Michael Lewis, talking about brewery complaints, is that you measure your brewery complaints in tens of thousands of barrels, not in, thousands of barrels. So it becomes one of these things where there may be all these things happening that are well below your radar in the marketplace. Just because you're not hearing from customers doesn't mean that there aren't customer reactions to these sorts of changes. For transparency's sake, we have not really incorporated these products into Breakside IPA or Wanderlust, our two flagship brands, mainly for some of these reasons that we're discussing. That's a big move and it's a little bit risky. We've done beers at the pubs over the last year where we've talked about, kind of like We do these like freestyle Fridays where Dylan and our R&D brewer and I just kind of whip up a recipe and just whatever's on our minds hop wise. And so sometimes it's like, let's see if we can make a beer like Wanderlust, but use a good bit of quantum. And we don't advertise as a Wanderlust knockoff, but that becomes kind of a data point for us internally about whether we can flavor match, indirectly. With us, any trial we do, the feedback loop is typically going to be about, we're going to wait till about 30 days to get some internal feedback from the kind of a blind snapshot panel. And then, once that's kind of come through, we might wait another 30 days before we schedule something again, just as kind of a baseline. Our sensory team has done a really good job of kind of starting to work with data analytics to try and see not only mapping what the kind of preference scores are at hedonic levels and true to brand scores are as we make recipe changes, but also the reliability of those numbers, the p-value of them, to see like, hey, this seems like people like this one, but actually the scores are so noisy that the numbers themselves are not really reliable, that we can't say as confidently that this change really was effective or positive in a positive or negative way. So we're looking more and more at that. And on the other hand, the other side of me sort of takes what my buddy over at Pine House, Joe Morfeld, likes to say, which is that no one complains when a beer gets better. And so there's a little bit of that, throw caution to the wind mentality that we have to adopt in order to not just ossify and become dinosaurs.
Sure. We have a question from Renee out there who was talking about the body effects of using hops in their plant form. Do you all compensate in any kind of way when you have now replaced, say, a quarter of the intended hop flavor and intensity with something that is extracted, or rather than using that kind of green matter? You're already doing some of that when you're using concentrated hop products. Are there any other recipe considerations that you consider when you are creating these beers?
Yeah, I would say our big thing is to just be careful not to go too far. I think you can start to taste it, and to me it tastes a little, kind of comes off a little thin, if you will. I do think that too much of these types of products will rob a lot from the body. So start small and start inching up towards your target. It would be my recommendation.
Yeah, body perception in kind of really heavily hop beers is something that's been top of mind for me in the last year, in large part because I think one of the biggest pieces of feedback we often get, critical feedback we've seen in competition over the last years, that the beers can come off a little bit thin, and I think maybe that's a question of a mix of TG, of bodybuilding malts, and also I think perception of kind of bitterness and polyphenol structure in the beers. And to your point, Renee, like hop T90 additions and bitterness contributions do give a perception of body, and can actually help with that kind of structure, even in very dry beers. So we've kind of found that there's a level of T90 use in any beer of ours, just across the hot side, as well as through a dry hop, that we're going to maintain. We do have some recipes that go up to 80% impact in concentrated hops in various forms. But even I'd say for the most part, we still are around 40 to 50% in most of our beers in T90 impact. So again, here I would count like a half an ounce of quantum per barrel as 1 pound of impact per barrel, just using that as kind of the baseline. But yeah, I think that is an interesting thing to try and suss out, is where, as you have less and less hop matter in some beers, how do you maintain a question of body and not just make it kind of thin and watery? It's a great challenge.
Sure. Does anyone else if anyone else has questions, throw them out in the comments, and we'll try to get those in here too. Barbara, how have other brewery, folks that you work with, been trying to kind of compensate around that, or are they even? I mean, now I'm having so many conversations, especially in Portland a couple weeks ago when I saw you, Ben, conversations with brewers about brewing 1.5, final gravity, like ripping West Coast IPAs with lots and lots of hop character, and so, as that whole style gets leaner and leaner in general, are you just pulling down that bitterness, and maybe body isn't necessarily all that it's cracked up to be in that kind of style? But then of course, we shouldn't only talk about it in this sense of West Coast IPA, because these these products are very, they're expressive and certainly useful in much more body forward styles like hazy IPA.
Yeah, I think, look, this is sort of the next level of the technology in the changing beer landscape, right? So 10 years ago, Ben could have been one of the first ones that had raised his hands and said he'd never make a hazy beer. I don't remember that, Ben, but could have been. And now look, haze is everywhere, and brewers have spent decades and millions of dollars to figure out how to make it stable. I think that with the evolution of beer styles and beer categories and flavor technology like we're bringing to the table, this is the next level of conversation. What will West Coast IPA as a category look like in 5 years versus what it was last year, as the flavor technology and hop technology continues to evolve and improve? I think that body and balance is always going to be here as a brewing industry and something to consider. But I think that final outcome of what the drinker wants and what is being allowed in competitions in different sort of categories or even new categories is going to continue to change. So we see the flavors hitting the right spot with a lower like ABV or non-alcoholic from also the complexity of like a brew gas or a Sky Farm, because sometimes that thiol creation and that complexity with just the flavors also adds to perceived body and balance in the finished product. So whether it's adding additional adjuncts to offset lack of polyphenols, or if it's just the new complex flavor technology that's helping add back in some of the complexity, I guess the world is our oyster, and that's what we're always going to continue to be the first in the flavor technology market to bring to the table as an opportunity.
Patrick, we have another question about NA and hop water, and I'm curious on this one. When you use these in these low or no alcohol, beers, whether it's NA beer or hop water, especially in hop water, are there techniques that you use, whether that's mineral composition of the water itself, whether that's manipulating acidity in this, that help the expression, help amplify and support the expression of these Abstrax terpenes in that kind of low or no alcohol environment?
Yeah, for us, I mean, I've played around with the mineral kind of water profile a little bit and found that adding more to kind of our base level, which is already somewhat hard, did not benefit it. So I pulled back mineral additions completely on that. As far as acidity goes, I played around with a little bit of different acids, and I found that the flavor profile really works best with citric acid. And I think if you're making hop water, you're already acidifying for safety. And I think, you really just got to choose your acid that works best. Phosphoric was rather boring. And lactic, you can almost taste the lactic. There might be something fun to try in a mix of citric and lactic. But they really work well with the kind of the fruit flavors that I'm also adding on top of like the hops.
Sure. Omniterpenes. A question from Carrie out there. Have you using those?
I've experimented a little bit with the Omni hop terpenes. I kind of went back to the Quantum. The Quantum seemed a little bit fruitier to me, and that was fitting my flavor profiles a little better.
We've not used the Omni ones. Yeah.
Cool. We have any more questions out there? Maybe I'll ask in the meantime, Patrick, or maybe we'll start with you, Ben. If someone wanted to taste a Breakside beer made with these Abstrax, products, are there any specific beers of yours that you think are interesting showcases, or that show some possibility there, even if they're not widely available out there in the distribution market? Even if someone has to go to Portland and try them in one of your pubs, are there some specific beers that come to mind for you that people can triangulate against?
Yeah, poor baby who has to come to Portland, right? We have a horrible place up here.
You know how I feel about Portland. You know how much I love Portland.
You love it. Yeah.
I need any excuse to go drink beer with you.
So right now we have a beer out in the marketplace called Dreamers of the Golden Dream. That's a collab we did with Everywhere that uses some Nectaron. Actually, the first batch used some Waka Quantum, and that has Nectaron at a fairly high level in it in the subsequent batches. That's probably the freshest batch. We're actually going to, for folks who are familiar with our collaboration with, our longstanding collaboration with Barley Brown's Wanderjack, that beer used to be predominantly Mosaic Strata. It's now Mosaic Strata Nectaron, and so for the batches that'll be in package this fall, there's going to be Nectaron Quantum in that. So that's, going back to the question about moving these into core brands. This is like a seasonal brand where I'm like, okay, let's test the waters here and see where we can move things. So that'll be some Nectaron Quantum. Those are probably the two biggest volume beers of ours where you'll find it right now. But at the pub, we had a lot of success at World Beer Cup this year with some beers that had Quantum in them, and a lot of those beers are getting rebrewed right now for GABF. So if anyone's coming up through Portland during Hop Harvest, stop by the Slabtown Pub, and probably 5 or 6 of those beers will have some level of Quantum additions in them. And that's not, we're not like juicing per se there. Those were just, like I said at the very beginning, subs from when we ran out of Simcoe Cryo that we needed to make. And I, started knocking on Barbara's door. There was one question I noticed in that I don't think we got to from my buddy Madison, and so I want to jump on that real quick about handling reduced bitterness, subbing in products. Frankly, we're not using them really in terms of traditional ISO bitterness from hot side additions. We're not really changing much when we're using these in beer, so our BU numbers look pretty close to what they would be like if we were just using all T90 in the dry hop. I'll be honest, we never really had that much success until maybe 2 or 3 years ago when I think we saw a lot of improvement in the quality of concentrated pellets, and then the emergence of these terpenes to be able to get our West Coast IPAs above 4 to 4.5 pound per barrel dry hop without ending up with some undesirable polyphenol, right? And I think that really what these have done for us, besides all the business stuff, besides all the other stuff we kind of mentioned, is enabled even more maximalist expression in these beers. And so I don't really think there's any lost bitterness. If anything's been lost in my mind, it's only just it was stuff that we were trying to cut out in the first place. So it's positive additions without the baggage.
Patrick, are there any beers of yours that are excellent showcases for what Abstrax products can do in your beer?
Yeah, we have a beer on the shelf right now, grocery store shelves, called Tropical Haze, and that's kind of the showcase of the Sky Farm stuff. The other stuff you're probably going to have to come into the brewery to get, and it's not uncommon that I have a few experiments going on the tap handles, whether they're Brew Gas, Sky Farms, or the Quantum stuff.
Sure. Barbara, as we wrap up here, any closing thoughts for our brewer audience out there watching and listening who may still have be interested in this? Any kind of bigger guidance that you can share with them, or some push to get out there and do some of their own experimentation?
Absolutely. First, I am honored that I get to even be on a call with Patrick and Ben and you, Jamie, because Ben and Patrick, I just look up to and have the utmost respect for their brewing talents and reputation in the industry. But secondly, it's here. The forward technology with the terpene flavors is here for you to make your spice cabinet even better, your beer a higher quality, or your non-beer a higher quality. So the barrier shouldn't be in existence for you. And it's easy enough to get to our website, abstraxhops.com, ask for some samples. We'll get them to you. We'll help share dosing guides. We've been accused of being a cheat in the industry. It's cheating using terpenes and flavors and oils. And I say absolutely not. We're the easier button, not the easy button. You still have to have some skill and some thought, but we're the easier button. And we're here to help mitigate a lot of rising costs that you guys are dealing with. And we're here to help make sure that your finished product is of high quality standards that you want.
Yeah, no one is using these as 100% replacement.
No.
These are a tool within the broader mix of ingredients that brewers use. And if anyone wants to call them a cheat, then I know a whole bunch of brewers that are winning lots of medals with those beers using these products in them, and that's a whole nother question.
It's true.
You don't view it as cheating, right, Ben?
There's no such beer other than what's in the glass. That's it.
Well, we've been talking for 80 minutes now. Appreciate everyone that has thrown questions out there in the comments. We will follow up and share this video out to others. So if you've got peers out there in the brewing industry that didn't get to sit here and listen in and throw their questions out, by all means, send them to all of the platforms where this will be shared out there. And of course, if you all have any questions, Barbara and the Abstrax team would be happy to answer them for you. Barbara, you all offer sample kits for folks that want to get out there and test some of these in their own beers?
Absolutely. Send us an email.
Great. Well, let's wrap it right there. Patrick, Ben, Barbara, thank you all so much for this deep dive into using abstract terpenes in beer. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.